There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing it all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. All right, I know all of you have a lot of ambitions and probably some particular goals that you're striving for. Let's say something like you really want to learn to speak eloquently at a public event. The only problem is there's this voice in your head that says basically you can't do it. And it says all sorts of different things for different people. Like it might say, what if you trip and fall when you walk on stage? And then all you think about is how you're going to trip and fall and likely to do so. Or maybe that voice is a little more critical and it says, well, why would people listen to you? Or why do you deserve to be in this particular role? Well, all of us, I'm going to argue, have our own mantra that undermines our confidence and keeps us from moving forward. And the question is, realistically, what can you do about it? And I am happy to say there are actually some solutions. I've taught about this. I've thought about it. I've written a little bit about it. I have my own experiences, but I'm happy to say the person I'm speaking to today has much better advice than I do. All right. So Jenn Donahue is my guest. She's a PhD author, retired U.S. Navy captain, and former commodore for a 1,800 personnel regiment. She's also a civil engineer who works on large-scale, high-profile projects. And over her 27-year military career, she has built bridges across the Euphrates River in the midst of the Iraq War, commanded an 800-person battalion in Afghanistan, and constructed combat outposts in the middle of deserts filled with insurgents. I think if anybody's got a right to talk about the voices in your head, Jenn does. And fortunately for us, she's passionate about helping other people overcome obstacles that prevent them from achieving their grandest dreams and most ambitious goals. A great international keynote speaker. And as if that isn't enough, she's the founder of J.L. Donahue Engineering, Inc., and lectures at Berkeley, UCLA, and Cal Poly. And the book we're talking about today, Becoming the Warrior, Harnessing Inner Strength to Silence Self-Doubt. Jenn, welcome.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here again.
I am too. I loved our first conversation. And I have to say, there are a lot of books I like. I loved this book. I read this book and immediately sent it out to dozens of people. You got to read this one. You got to see this one. I just think it's great. And I usually start this with, why did you write the book? I don't want to start there. I want to start with a very different place. I want to talk about these voices in our head. You know, the ones that say that you're about to fail in one way or another. And I'm going to confess, mine is, who do you think you are? Now, I can tell you chapter and verse about whose voice that is, where it got started, why it's still there, and how I deal with it. But tell me about your experience.
Mine really started a little bit earlier on, but then I got over it. But then I had a colossal failure, and all of a sudden the voices all came back again. And what I've really noticed is when I'm really outside of my comfort zone, that's when I hear the voices the most. You know, even writing the book, kept thinking, who's going to want to read this? You know, and I'm a speaker, so I get on stage and all of a sudden I start to think, who's going to listen to me? Are they just going to be on their phones the whole time? They're probably just going to think I'm dumb. So there's all these voices and pretty much everybody has them.
Okay, so what are those voices about?
Well, if you want to get really technical and scientific, it actually comes from the frontal cortex.
Okay.
But if we don't want to get all sciencey on it, really it comes from some of our past failures that we might have had earlier in our life. They might come from experience. But, we have these voices that we've had since birth, the ones that tell us, I'm hungry, or I need to go to the bathroom, or I'm really tired. There's all these little voices that we already have in our head. And then as we start to mature, then those voices start to take on different characteristics. They're the ones that start to say, maybe you're really not that good at this, or who's going to listen? Who's going to read this? And so there's these nefarious little voices that we have that are in our head that we need to learn how to deal with.
Okay. Now, are the voices usually, like in my case, it's a distinct person's voice. And so it's not like I literally hear like I'm hallucinating, but those voices came from a person in my life. Is that common, or they come from a bunch of different, or are there many different voices?
I have found that they're different for different people. For mine sounds like my voice, but it just sounds really mean. It's like oily and just sharp edged and, just horrible. I did a workshop a few months ago and I just asked people, it's like, what does that mean little voice sound to you? Some people sounded like a spooky, sleepy hollow type of voice. One person said that it sounded like their mother-in-law. And I was like, oh, wow, that's like a whole nother subject. But I mean, so for instance, like where did your voice come from?
Mine is my mother, my constant critic. Bless her, she's no longer alive, but still, it's her voice. And the criticism was always well-meaning to push me to do better. But when I am in that space where I'm not so sure it's going to work out, man, that little voice comes back in there. And it really is just, who do you think you are? What right do you have to be here? Why do you think you're better than somebody else? Which she said to me on thousands of occasions. So it's a good reason that is there in her voice.
A lot of times this also happens, like I said, when we're trying to stretch or when we're trying to do something new, or maybe we're doing something just to elevate ourselves. Because what I really think is that a lot of times these voices are really trying to, in their own way, keep us safe. And what I mean by that is that if we never try something, if we never go out and do this podcast, or we don't go do that speech, we will never know the possibility of failing, of tripping as you go up the stairs. It keeps you safe because you never have to try. And so in a way, I think those voices are in their own way trying to keep us at our status quo. They're not letting us grow any because they just want to keep us where we are so that we might not fail in the future.
All right. You said that yours were there and then you had a spectacular failure. So I find a lot of times people have that self-protection of, I'm not going to do that thing again that I failed on. So tell me a little bit. Do you mind telling us about your spectacular failure? I think we all have them, but I'd love to hear.
Yes. I was the commanding officer of a battalion of 800 people, and I was in Afghanistan. And I had a boss he was actually pretty horrible. He's probably one of the worst bosses I've ever had. And he constantly, on a daily basis, would just rip into people. I think that's how he thought he was supposed to lead. People would sit around in meetings and they would just be quiet. There was finger pointing. People were stabbing each other in the back. They didn't want him blowing up at them. I mean, this guy was literally 6'5", probably about 280 pounds. He was a huge, huge guy. And when he yelled at you, man, you felt so small. Like if you were an inch tall, that would be a miracle. Well, after day after day after day of having him yell at me over and over again, maybe it's because he didn't completely agree with something that I did, or I made a small mistake. Man, he would just come down on me so hard. And so after days and weeks and months of this type of mental abuse, honestly, I felt like I was a place where, like, you know what, I can't lead anymore. And when I finally had my we call them fitness reports, basically your what do I want to say? It's basically whenever you leave and you had to be graded by your boss. And so we were doing this fitness report and I was tired. I'd been a commanding officer for 3 years. That's more than most, usually it's just 2, but I was there for 3 and I was tired. And I said, you know what? I don't think I want to go for command next. And he said, good, because you're not even ready. And I was like, just hearing that was just so horrible. It's like, I was tired. I didn't want to, but just the way that he said it, it was just so brutal, to hear that type of attack on yourself. And so after I left Afghanistan, I thought, who am I ever going to lead again? I am horrible at leading, apparently, according to this guy. And I felt like a shell. And ever since then, really since then, that's when the voices started to come in. And they lived in my head. And they kept telling me, you're not good enough. Don't even try. You should just stay in the dark. And, don't even Don't even talk to your husband. Don't talk to your friends. You're not even good enough for them.
Ooh, that sounds like a pretty dark place, Jenn.
It really was. And I had to try to find a way out. Because honestly, I am a happy person. I'm a happy person again. I was a super happy person before. I was one of those people who was like, "Don't you tell me no. I'm gonna show you." And that's who I always have been. But then I went through this like horrible time, and there was a whole bunch of other stuff that was going on with some. I had 5 bosses. That was a whole nother thing. I had, those other 4 bosses were, some were good, some were bad. They all had their own agenda, but I had to find a way back. And the way that I did that is I started to experiment based on my military training of what do we do for enemies. And in the military, we have a very strict system for whenever an enemy is coming at us. And I used that same framework to create a framework for my own mind about that. And so I use the framework that we use in the military for physical enemies to look at metaphysical enemies that were basically invading my brain. I know that sounds crazy, but it works. It really does.
I actually think it's a great phrasing to recognize that the voices in your head are often enemies. They're not your allies. They're pretending to be your allies, but they're not. They're your enemies because they're keeping you from feeling successful. They're keeping you from feeling that you can achieve and so on. All right. So now you've done that. Tell me, what's this framework? How does it work? And how did you use that for you?
So there's 4 pieces of it. And it's really perceiving is the first one. And what that's all about is, like I said, we have all these voices in our head, the ones that are telling us that we're hungry or we're tired or don't walk down that alley because it looks scary. Then there's those other voices like what we were just talking about, like, hey, you're not good enough. Hey, you should wait. And so perceiving is all about taking the time to recognize which voice is actually trying to talk to you. Is this something that is really ultimately trying to keep you safe or something that's trying to hold you back? So that's what perceive is all about. It's situational awareness, what we call in the military. The next is all about assessing and trying to figure out, again, what is that voice really trying to tell you? In the military, we think about, is that person that's coming at us, is it actually a friend or is it a foe? And really trying to get at the heart of, what that is. And a lot of times we tell them, hey, stop what you're doing. And that's what assessing is all about, is can we start to recognize these mean little voices? And I have the mean little voice, and I have the sneaky little bastard, which we'll get into in a minute. But, understanding, okay, who is the one talking? Then it's about getting ready. And one of the best ways to ready yourself is to start to think about, what do you have in your day? Do you have a hard meeting that's coming up? Do you have a hard conversation? Do you have a podcast? Are you going to be going up on stage? What are all the situations that you're going to be going through today that you might have one of those mean little voices decide that they were going to come and start talking to you? And so ready is all about preparing for that event. And what I think is the best way to do that is we have to know what that voice is going to say so that we are able to respond better. For instance, if it says, hey, you know what? You're not going to be really good when you go up on stage. What I'd like to do is go more towards a positive thinking and start to think about all the things that you've already done. Start to think about all of the really super successful speeches that you've given. Think about the audience and what they can get out of it. Think about the people who have come up to you afterwards and said, thank you. So ready is all about thinking about what's coming up and how do we basically counter that quickly. And I have my counterpoint, which is what I call the warrior, who's basically able to say, no, you know what, we are good at this. This is what we're going to do. And then the final one is just to act. We go through this whole process of like, okay, well, we're going to be fine. And then all of a sudden we get to the precipice and it's like, no, I don't know. No, you just need to act. Just take a small little step forward. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be a leap of faith, but just take that simple little easy step and act. So those are the 4 pieces: perceive, assess, ready, and act.
I really do like the framework. I think it's a powerful, straightforward framework. And I actually like the fact that this is preparation for an enemy to decide what I need to do. Like, how am I supposed to respond? A, what is it? B, what's this really about? And then C, am I ready for this? What have I prepped? What do I know? What can I do? And then do. I just think it's very clever. All right. So go back to, you've finished under this horrible commander, or he's not a commander. He was, anyway, the head. And you're defeated, struggling, I'm presuming, to kind of pick yourself back up and figure out what next chapter is, plus the level of exhaustion, plus all that it means to have been out overseas and leading command and all of that. Walk me through how you use the perceive, assess, ready, act.
I started by really trying to dig out what was going on in my brain. I remember that I had done something similar to this when I was a lot younger. It actually comes from my mom. I had gone through this horrible breakup, and I was coming up with all of these, what if he never loved me? Everything that a normal 17-year-old would do. And I was coming up with all these crazy scenarios. And she basically just flat out said, are you going to let your head beat you? Like, you're making all this up. And at that point, it really clicked. And that's when I started to recognize the voices for what they were. And I was making it all up. And so at that point, I realized, she's right. I'm not going to let my head win. I need to recognize the voice and do something about it. So I kind of dug that out of my past history and started to think about that again and starting to separate out that voice. And what I started to do is every time I heard the voice, I would literally go grab a piece of paper off my printer and start writing out a couple of nice things that I actually had done. And what that did is I would look at it and it's like, okay, I know that this is real. I know that I've done this. And then I started to think about how I had done it. Was I more courageous than I thought? Was actually smarter than I wanted to give myself credit for? And I started to piece together like what my strengths were with what I had accomplished. And so every time I heard that voice in my head, I'd basically just go over and I'd start writing down all my accolades again. And the more that I did it, what I found was that it started to get a little bit easier and it started to get quicker. I started to look at my accolades. I started to look at my strengths and start to realize, hey, wait a minute. These are things that I've done. I actually have inherent strengths that are the opposite of what this mean little voice is trying to tell me. So whenever I start to hear the mean little voice, my brain would click into that other side to say, no, hey, you know what? We can do this. We have done it in the past. Here's all of my resume that says I can do it again. And so I started to piece all of this together. And I started to look at, what do we do in the military whenever we have an enemy coming? We do that perceive, assess, ready, and act. And so I started to mold it into that. And it's like it started to get quicker and quicker and quicker. And man, after that, now even every time that I hear it now, I basically go through that loop another time and they quiet down. They're like, okay, cool. Yeah, maybe you do have this. And they step back and it's nice. And it's nice. And it's like, yeah, I actually feel more positive than I would have previously. And it's like, yeah, let's go do this. And I have that confidence again and have my courage again and I have my happiness again.
That's great. How long did it take you to get through that?
It was a good 6 months, and then I kind of kept tweaking it a little bit until I figured out this is the right pattern. But it did take about 6 months for me to really work through, dig myself back out, practice, and get to where I am today.
I'm sorry that it took you so long, but I'm also not surprised because when you go through a really horrendous experience that causes you to question everything about yourself and to feel terrible about yourself, it takes a while to dig back out of that. And I think you're right in that it takes repetition of reinforcing the positives. So recognizing that voice, perceiving, then sort of, wait a minute, there are other things that have happened, not just this thing. And then ready, here's what I have done that's really good. And then, take a small step and move forward. Okay. So Jenn, not to undercut the power of that one, walk me through an example that's like one of your clients or somebody in the business world and how you've helped them get through using this framework.
Absolutely. I'm actually working with a client right now who, he's the perfect model for this. And he came to me and he's like, this is what I really want to do, but you know what, I'm just not ready. And we sat down and we started to go through the framework and said, okay, you know, just tell me what's going on in your head. And I made him just tell me all the conversations that are going on. He's like, and then, some of them he just like, he really believed. He's like, well, maybe I'm not a good enough person to go for this position. And we started to, it's like, okay, that's your little voice talking to you. And then we started to look at, assessing. It's like, but what have you done? What have you already done? And we started to get into ready. And I said, hey, you know what? I want you to just start being a little bit more positive. I want you to just write down one win per day, just one. And so he started to do that, and he started to pick up on all of these great things that he was already doing. And then we got into, what have you done? What are your accomplishments and your strengths? And so we started to go through that exercise as well. And he's like, hey, you know what? I did really well on this project last week. And I was like, well, how did you do it? And he said, well, I work really well with my team, and I had this great idea. And so I was like, okay, you work well with people. You're a visionary. And he was like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. And so going through this over and over, he's starting to realize that, hey, wait a minute, I probably am good enough for this position. And so once he started to get his confidence back, then I said, well, what's the one small little thing that you can do to go after that position? He's like, well, I can talk to my boss about it. I was like, okay, that's a great one. It's like, is there anything even smaller before you even do that? I was like, that's a pretty good leap. And he's like, well, I just need to kind of go through and find out what the requirements are. I was like, perfect. Just go do that. It's like, there's no harm in that. There's no consequences to that. Just go find that out. And he's like, oh, okay, great. I was like, perfect. You're doing great. And then he understood that. And I'm like, let's go through those requirements. We went through the requirements. He met all of those. And it's like, okay, now you're ready. You have the backup. You have the confidence. And you know what? He got the job. So it's like, okay, it's working. It's, it's kind of just diving into all of these little nuances about ourselves and coming back with confidence and that courage to just take that first step.
Right. I think what is so powerful is, like, I'm thinking about somebody I worked with today, who has knocking out of the park in a dozen dimensions. But on one particular thing, her confidence is a little bit low. Okay. So she's fine in public speaking, but not lovely about public speaking in a grand stage. And just for the record, I have several of those clients, but I happen to be talking to one today. And if you think about it, there's so many things she's done incredibly well, but that one thing gets her a little nervous. All right. So there's a voice there that says, I don't know if I can do this. And there's also people who've been critical of her performances in the past in ways that undermined her confidence. And there's probably been a failure or two that didn't go as brilliantly as she'd wanted it to, all of which add up to this thing of, oh no, I may not make it. This may not be okay, is kind of what happens for her. And just doing this process of recognizing, what is the voice? What is that voice actually telling you? Is there reality there, not reality there? Is there something I need to learn from, not learn from? Okay. And turn it into the positive. Not, oh no, I'm going to fall. It's, oh no, I need to be careful in the first step, or whatever version that is, that's an appropriate action. And then assessing, where have you succeeded? You succeeded in dozens of different places in dozen different ways. And then how have you succeeded? What were you doing? Remember to do that again, all of those pieces, and then just go. It's that framework for recognizing how your own fear voice is holding you back, and not just letting it sit there and stew.
Right. I joke that, for a while, my little voices took up residence in my head. They were so confident that they actually ordered cable TV and got potted plant. And I mean, you know how hard it is to cancel cable TV. They were that confident that they were going to stick around. And it just started to take a while to basically uproot them and get them out. And, for your client, yeah, just being able to start small again and start to build that confidence as you go, and remember all of the great things that you have already done. I mean, that's amazing. You know, you said that she's knocking it out of the park on all of these other areas of her life. How did she do that? And she apply that same tenacity, to this one subject as well, and I think if she had that little bit of confidence and she's able to apply it, wow, there's amazing things that can be done.
I think there is power in, so I think the secret sauce is in your first step. Perceiving the voice, admitting the voice, recognizing the voice, recognizing where the voice came from, recognizing the voice isn't necessarily 100% accurate. That perceiving thing to me is, otherwise we just run. That's how they set up cable TV and potted plants and everything else, is because we don't stop to pay attention. I think you have to stop and pay attention to it. And I think the fear is if I pay attention to it, it becomes more real. And it's the opposite. If I pay attention to it, I can actually assess whether it's factual or not factual.
One of the things that I also like to tell people is that go find a mentor. Go find, I call it a battle buddy, that person that's going to be with you all the time. And you know what? Have a conversation with them, because here's the great thing. They can't hear your mean little voice. Like, they know what the truth is. They know what they see in you. That's what the truth is. So if you start to have problems with, like, is this real or is this not real? That what this voice is trying to tell me, go talk to your battle buddy. Go talk to your coach. Go talk to that mentor and just sort of discuss it, because they see what's actually factual and they can help kind of discern what's real and what's not in your head.
Okay. All right. So in your experience, Jen, do most people have these voices?
I have found that probably about 80% of the people that I've talked to have these voices. There's some super confident people out there that have no idea what I'm talking about. They're like, what voices? I just do it. I'm like, cool. You guys are awesome. Then there's the rest of us. A lot of times we're a little bit more self-aware. We're more thinking about what's going on in our head. And what I like to tell leaders who are the ones that are saying, like, I don't know what you're talking about, to just think about their own team at work. If 4 out of 5 people have these voices in their head and they don't, they need to recognize that, a good portion of their team is probably going through this situation. They need to have a better understanding that they're not the let's just go do it type of people. They're the ones that are questioning themselves, looking at their own self-doubts before they actually go forward. And so for those people who are like, yeah, I don't get it, pay attention and understand the other people so that you can help them maybe get to a better spot.
All right. So in some ways, what we're talking about is imposter syndrome, which I would like to kill the name on, because it sounds like it's a disease and it sounds like something's wrong with you if you feel like an imposter. So, and I love to quote one stat. 93% of the world's adult population has experienced imposter syndrome at some time or another. Imposter syndrome is where those voices start to say, you can't do this, whether you want to label them as a voice or as something else. So I think it's common. And I think the ones that don't have it are the ones that are either super arrogant, which I'm not sure I want to model after, or who've never gotten out of their comfort zone. Pretty easy not to feel like an imposter if I do what I already know how to do and have done hundreds of times over. Okay, check. So I think it's pretty common. And I know when I ask large audiences, how many of you have ever felt like an imposter or had a crisis of confidence or any version of that, I get pretty much 100% of the hands going up in the room. So I don't think there's anything wrong with you if you feel that self-doubt. Okay? I think that's a good thing. It's just admitting it, going forward with it, or not, admitting it and doing something about it. The other thing I was going to say is for people who say that they are super confident and who look super confident, in my experience, when you watch what they've done before they come out on public and say, yeah, this is the thing to do, you'd see that they've done 5 things that get them ready that they don't even recognize in themselves. So
that's a good way to put it. A good friend of mine, Chris Kelso, he's done a lot of research on this also. And so I think there's almost another group that goes with that, is that the real imposters don't have imposter syndrome because they know that they're an imposter. And so those kind of like those super, those people who are like, well, I'm just going to do it anyway, so I think that's very telling from what you just said.
That's right. That's right. I think, yeah, I'd agree with that. And there's wonderful power in saying, I'm not sure, getting other people to help you. I think that's a fabulous one. All right. Now, a couple of times you've mentioned this thing called the mean little voice. So would you tell me the mean little voice and the sneaky little bastard? Tell me about that.
Okay, so the mean little voice, that's the one that I found whenever I was the teenager in the middle of my breakup. And it was that voice for me that says, you're not good enough, you're never going to be able to do this. It's very negative. And like I said, it sounds a lot like my voice, but it's just mean and oily and nasty and, just, ugh. So that's the mean little voice. And so I've definitely been able to separate that out from, just the normal everyday type of chatter that's going on in my head. What I realized over the last couple of years, though, is there's another little voice that's in there, and this one is really sneaky. And so I call it the sneaky little bastard. So this is the one that's sitting on your shoulder, and you think of everything you need to do in your day, and there's this really hard task that's really going after what your goal is, what your dream is, and it's the one that's saying, hey, why don't we go clean out the dishwasher instead? It's the one that's saying, maybe we should do something else. It's the one that's always trying to not have you do that. It's making you procrastinate on purpose so that you never actually go after whatever that goal is, or picking up that phone to call that client. Wow, my sneaky little bastard is always on that one, trying to pick up the phone to call a client. Is like, somehow I find that's a perfect opportunity to go walk the dogs. But it's the one that's just not letting you go do what you need to do in order to be successful. And so maybe it's procrastination, but for me, it's a sneaky little bastard.
Yep. And often silent. It's just that it puts that thought. It doesn't say anything. It just puts that thought in, like, oh, wait, before you do that, you need to clean your desk, organize your to-do list. 100 other things get sneaking right on in there. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Now, you have this lovely section in the book where you say what doesn't work. So can you just walk us through what doesn't work?
I've seen a lot of people who they hear the voices, they just let them go. And they keep going. But what I have found with those people is that they keep coming back, and they keep coming back, and they keep coming back louder and stronger. They get a better foothold into the mind. And so nobody's actually dealing with those. They're just, oh, well, that's who they are. I'm going to just move on. They never get to the root of the problem, and they never find a way to actually just dislodge them. So that's what I found. If you just decide, oh, I just hear it, I'm just going to let it go away. That to me has not really ever worked. I've also found the people who just bury them deep down, and they just shove those things way down and like, I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not going to think about it. Okay, they are eventually going to come back. If you don't get to the root of the problem, it's like shampoo, rinse, repeat. They're just going to keep coming back and keep coming back. But the third group that I found is the ones that have, they listen to it, but they listen to it too much, and they overcompensate. So for instance, if your voice is telling you, well, I'm not really that good at this, they're the ones that go overboard, and they try to do everything, and they keep trying to prove to the world that they're ready, when really they're trying to prove to themselves that they're ready. These are the people who are usually overtaxed, they're stressed, they're burnt out because they're trying so hard to prove to the world that they are worthy.
See a few of those in any given day, week, month, year. I'm sure you do as well. As you said that, Jenn, it made me go back to my cognitive psychology training and note that anything that keeps reappearing in your memory gets stronger in your memory. I don't have to hang on to it. I don't have to elaborate it and have to do much of it. It's because it appears once, it will appear again and again and again. And it's that kind of thing. If you sort of start thinking about, I need chocolate, suddenly you're thinking about chocolate constantly, even though that's a positive. It just doesn't go away. That's how the brain works cognitively. And what you're saying about these strategies is we're allowing each voice, each negative message to stick and get reinforced, even if I'm not intending to. So the only solution then is to substitute them with something else. And I think that's what's so clever about your strategy. What's the substitution process? And actively make another thought. Here's what I have done, for example.
It really is. So, we're talking about these different voices, but I also believe that there's another positive voice that's in there. When you go after something, it's that one that says, I can, I want to do this. That's the voice that we need to latch on to, not the ones that are telling us you're not good enough. We need to latch on the ones that says, hey, I want this. I know I can do it. So that one may be way in the back, but let's find that one. Let's bring that one forward. Let's give that one some meat. Let's give that one some, in the warrior, let's make it strong. Let's give it some armor. Let's give it some teeth. And by going through and positively, looking at what have we done? What are these positive thoughts that we can have instead of these negative ones? Using that positivity, the positivity will become stronger. And this is, as you know, this is totally backed by science. By the way, I'm also a nerd. I'd like to study neuroscience. And so if you're starting to go through the process of positively thinking about all these things that you could be doing as opposed to the negative, the positives are going to start to win out, especially after about 28 days, which is on average what most scientists believe is what helps take a new positive thought take root.
28 days. I love that. 1 month.
1 month.
All you need is 1 month of practicing the positive. I love that. What a great tidbit. All right, Jenn, the process, that voice in your head that is either mean or sneaky, keeping you focused on doing anything other than the one action you need to do to move your goal forward. Mean is just telling you how bad you are and how incompetent you are. All of us, most of us, have some version of those voices. The process is perceive, meaning recognize the voice. Recognize that some voices are keeping us safe, like don't go down that dark alley, and some are just keeping us from doing what we want to do. So perceive, and then assess. And in assess, I'm trying to say, what is it telling me? Is it a friend or is it a foe? What is it really about? Where is it coming from? What's this thing? And then I want to say, all right, ready. How do I get myself ready? What's the situation? What have I done in the past? How am I prepared for? How can I handle this thing coming forward? And then act. Take a simple step.
That's it.
Rinse and repeat.
Exactly.
28 days worth.
28 days. 28 days, and you will see a remarkable difference in the amount of positivity that you have in your life.
Okay. I love it. I love it. So when we talked to a few years ago, Lisa Sun on confidence says she likes to give that voice a name. Hers has a very particular name made up from her, which has a whole backstory, but naming it helps you say, oh, there's Fred. Okay, Fred. But it puts a little humor, a little levity on it to be able to put a name. I like that idea too, as a tactic in there as well. So Jenn, great conversation. I love the book. Again, Becoming the Warrior, Harnessing Inner Strength to Silence Self-Doubt. What a great stories, great examples, and a very simple, doable process. Jenn, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, where could they find you?
Probably the easiest way is on my website, which is jendonahue.com, Jenn with 2 N's, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also Jenn Donahue on LinkedIn. So please just reach out. It would be absolutely fantastic to hear your own stories. How have you overcome imposter syndrome, self-doubt, whatever it might be? I'd love to hear it.
That sounds like a great challenge. And we'll also post that one as the podcast is going live. Jenn, thank you. What a pleasure always. I love the book. Highly recommend it. Simple process, but boy, I think it's a powerful one. Check out our brand new YouTube pages, Out of the Comfort Pod. And we also have a brand new YouTube Instagram channel, Out of the Comfort Pod. Love to hear from you. Send us a note. Go outofthecomfortzone.com. Anything, we want to hear your experiences, your stories, and your questions. So until next week, good luck with getting out of your comfort zone.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.